Here is an interesting project which also has some practical value. This is a form which has some input fields. There is an address field here. We can go in there, type a street name, let's say Water Street 20, let's say location in Australia. We click on the option, we get a map that's being generated with a marker pointing to our desired location. We can move the map, zoom out, zoom in, and we can also drag and drop the pin to a new location to sort of adjust the coordinates, and the map will switch immediately once we drop the pin. We can also reset the whole thing, and we can manually input the properties if some of them are not valid or if some of them need to be changed. For this app you will need to have a MapBox account, and in there you will get your MapBox API key or public token as they call it, which you will need to set up your API calls. You're also going to need a couple of npm packages, but I can show you how to install them when we get to them. Before we start, my name is Alex. If this sounds interesting to you, make sure to give me a like, subscribe if you are new to the channel, and let's jump into the project. I have a basic React app here, and I also have some files already set in place so we don't waste time making them. If you want to follow exactly what I have here, feel free to copy it. So in the source folder, I have an API folder which has a JavaScript file called getplaces.js. Currently, it's just exporting one function getPlaces, which we are going to use to set up our API call. In assets folder, there is a pointer SVG. This will be uploaded to my GitHub so you can download it, or if you want to use your own different marker, feel free to do so. In the components folder, I have the address form JSX, which imports the styling for address form in CSS, SCSS, which is here in the styles folder. I have the same thing here for autocomplete input and for map, and in styles each of the components has its own styling. So address form, autocomplete input, and map all have their own CSS. Now I will not go through all of the CSS because it's not that complicated, and I added it basically just to center stuff on the screen and make it responsive. I will link the CSS files in the description below so you can copy the CSS if you want to. The main app.jsx file currently just returns a div with a class name of app, and it imports the app CSS, and in there's also some basic CSS for the fonts and for centering stuff, and main JSX is completely unchanged. You will also need to set up your .env.local file where you will set up your token. You can do it right away. Simply create .env.local file in your project's root and add a property here called byte_token equals, and then add your token from your MapBox developer account. Make sure to save it, and we will use it later to make the API calls. To start the project, obviously you need to first install React app in whichever way you choose. I chose to do it through Vite. You will also need a couple of packages to install them. You need to enter yarn, add, and then Axios, MapBox-GL, React-map-GL, and Sass. If you don't want to use Sass, you don't need to, but your selectors are going to be a bit different than mine. Axios isn't necessary. We are using it just for one API call. If you don't want to use Axios, you don't have to. And then MapBox-GL and React-map-GL are mandatory. To start the application, I will run yarn dev. I want to first import the address form from .components/address form, and I also want to import the map. So import map from /components/map. For now, let's just show them here. So address form, close that, and we want to say map and close that, and we can see it showing up here. So address form and map. We also need to make another import here, which I'm just going to copy paste and you copy it for me. This is also necessary for the map styling to show correctly. So import mapbox-gl/dist/mapbox-gl.css. we are going to handle a bit of state. We are going to have an address and set address, which is going to be our main state, which we're going to handle with use state. So we need to import use state from React, and the address is going to be an object which has properties street and number, place, which is actually a city, region, which is region, postcode, which is postcode, country, and there is going to be two properties for latitude and longitude, which we are going to use to set up the marker and to center the view frame for the map. This is the default value, so basically a default state with all of the properties present but empty. We are going to have a small function here called handle form submit, which we are going to pass into the address form. So we're going to say handle form submit equals handle form submit. And basically what we're doing is we're simply doing a console log of a selected address. This is just to prove the concept that your address is being fully changed and you can do whatever you want in your own use case, whatever use case you have after you've submitted the form. We are also going to have a separate function for updating the coordinates, which accepts new values for latitude and longitude and just sets the address to the old value, and we're just changing the latitude and longitude. We are also going to pass in the address here. So address equals to address, and we are going to pass set address as set address, and we are actually going to change this handle form submit to on submit. So address form has three props: on submit equals handle form submit, address equals address, and set address equals set address, which is just our setter function for the state here. And map will also have a couple of props here. We are going to say longitude equals address.longitude, latitude equals address.latitude, and we are going to pass in the update coordinates function, which we have here. When we have a map and we change the marker, once we got to our final destination where we want to adjust the location a bit, we can adjust the marker and the longitude and latitude are going to be updated. We can proceed with creating the address form now. As mentioned previously, the address form is going to have three props, so address, on submit, and set address. We are also going to have an additional function here called handle manual input change, which is going to accept the event and a state property. So this function is going to be added to on change events for all of the inputs, and basically if we get an address, we select an address, our input fields get automatically filled, but we realize there is a mistake, we want to add something or remove something from an input field. Now we can do it through the handle manual input change, where we are getting the event from changing the value inside of an input. We will pass in the name of that property in state, so we can create a new state by spreading the old state. So the old address is getting spread into new address object. Then we are saying in the new address object, this is the state property that I want to change, and change it to the value of the input. And then we just say set address, which is the setter function that we are getting in through props, and we are setting the address to the new address. So this is going to be a form, but a form with a class name of form, and it's going to have on submit event, which is going to be the on submit event from the props. If you remember, we are just doing a console log of the final selected address. We can remove the address form and we can now add our other properties, our other fields in the form. First, we are going to add label. Each of the inputs is going to have its own label. So the first label is for the address. Then instead of a regular input, we are going to add our autocomplete input, which is going to have a couple of props. So we are going to have the set address, which is the same setter function that we are getting from the props. We are going to add the handle manual input change, which we are going to add to all of our inputs. And there is going to be a prop called street and number, which is just the street and number, which we are going to use to add the value to the input itself. And of course, we need to import the autocomplete input. Now, Vite is yelling at me for not having this validated, so you might need to do this as well. If you don't have prop types installed, you might need to install them separately, and we need to add the prop types for the address form, and we're just basically making all of the props required and defining address as an object on submit and set address as functions, which are both required. Continuing with adding the labels and the inputs, we're going to have a column of labels and inputs here. So for now we have a placeholder here for autocomplete input, but we are going to handle that later. And for now, like I said, we are adding label for city, and the input is going to be of type text, ID is going to be equal to city, placeholder is going to be equal to city, and value is going to be equal to address.place. This is named place because it's named place in the API, and there is going to be an on-change event. Like I said, we are going to pass in handle manual input change, and we're going to say the place is the property in the state that needs to be changed. After that, we are adding the label and input for state, which is pretty much the same thing. We just changed the label to state, province, region, and the placeholder, and the value is equal to address region. And once again, in handle manual input change, we are changing region. After that, we have a postcode label and input for postcode with a value of address.postcode, and in handle manual input change, we are handling or changing the postcode. Next, we are going to add a div here with the class name of buttons, which is going to be our button container. Inside, we are going to add a button with type of submit and class name of confirm button and with text confirm. Below that, we're going to add another button, which is going to have text of reset, and it's going to have some additional properties. So type is going to be reset, class name is going to be reset-button, and we're going to have an on-click event, which is just calling set address, and we are passing in an object which is basically our default starting state. And I actually missed one here. Between the postcode and buttons, we have another set of label and input for the country. So country, HTML for country, ID country, placeholder country, value address.country, and in handle manual input change, we are changing the country. We can proceed with the autocomplete input. In there, we said that we are going to have some props and we're going to add them here. So handle manual input change, set address, and street and number. We are also going to add prop types here. So importing prop types, and we are setting prop types to handle manual input change is going to be a required function. Set address is going to be a required function, and street and number is going to be a string, which is also required. We are going to handle a bit of state here, so we need to import the use state. Use state is going to be used for suggestions. Suggestions are the addresses that we are going to get from the API as potential auto-completed addresses. So we are calling them suggestions, and the setter function is set suggestions. The default value is going to be set to an empty array. We are going to have two functions here. The first one is going to be handle change, which is going to act a bit differently than from the other properties. So we are going to call the handle manual input change, which is basically saying, hey, we are changing street and number manually. But also we need to have another function, which is basically going to say, hey, here is a query, or here is a value that we need to pass into the API, and we need to get some addresses for autocomplete functionality from there. So in handle input change, we are going to call the API. Handle input change is going to be an async function, which is accepting a query. So it's basically going to be text that we are inputting in there. And we are going to say suggestions are equal to await get places with the parameter of query, and getPlaces is going to be our actual function with the actual API call. And once we get those suggestions, we are going to set the suggestions to that value. To set up the actual input property, we are going to have a div here, which is going to be our autocomplete input container, or that's going to be its class name. Inside, we're going to have an input which has an ID of address. It has a type of text. It has a placeholder of address. It has a value of street and number, which is our prop, which is going to be passed in over here. And it has an onChange event, which is calling our handle change like we said. And if we save that, now we see that we have our address here. So now we need to implement this function over here. First of all, we are going to import getPlaces from API getPlaces. Like we said, we are going to have a parameter here called query. Inside of the function, we are going to have a try-catch block. Inside of the try-catch block, we're going to say const response equals await axios.get. As a first parameter, we're going to have a URL to our API's endpoint, which is https://api.mapbox.com/geocoding/v5/mapbox.places/ curly braces. Inside of curly braces, we have our query, close curly braces, .json. And a second parameter is going to be an object which has params property, which is an object which has the access token, which is our Mapbox token, which is going to be equal to import.meta.env.write token. Now, if you followed my instructions from the beginning of the video where we talked about setting up your local environment file, your property should be named the same way. And in the end, we are just returning the response.data.features because the features is our list of potential auto-completed addresses. In the end, we're also going to try to catch the error, and if error happens, we're just going to say console.error, and there was an error while fetching places, and we're going to pass it in over here. Of course, for this to work, we need to import Axios from Axios. In order to test if this works, we need to set up our actual autocomplete suggestions. So we are going to create an unordered list with a class name of address suggestions. Inside, we are going to map the suggestions which we are setting here. So when we handle the input change, we are getting our suggestions, we are setting them into suggestions property in our state, and then we are mapping. So if there are suggestions, we are mapping them into a suggestion which has an index, and we are adding list items with a key of index, and we are also setting an on-click event which is going to call a function which we don't have yet, which we are going to implement, called handle suggestion click, and we are passing in that suggestion, which is basically going to say, hey, this is the suggestion that I've selected and I want to pass it into the map, or rather this is the address that I've selected, I want to pass it into the map. Inside of the list item, we are adding the text of the suggestion, which is stored in the property called place name. We are going to implement our handle suggestion click function over here. We are going to say const handle suggestion click equals, and we are passing in our suggestion. So the parameter, which is the suggestion that we just clicked on, in there we're going to say street and the number equals suggestion dot place name dot split, and we are going to split it over a comma, and we are going to select the first element. The reason is when you get suggestion place name, it's actually your street and number is in the first part, then you have a comma, then you have other stuff related to your address which can be different for different addresses. So for us, the important part is the first element. Then we are going to pick up latitude and longitude from the suggestion.latitude address.center property, which is an array where longitude is the first element, latitude is the second element. We're going to set up a default address here with our empty properties. To get all other parts of the address except for street and number, latitude and longitude, so place, region, postcode, and country, we need to go through suggestions.context, which is an array of elements. Each element has an ID and it has a text property, and we are going to say const identifier equals element dot ID split over a full stop or a dot, and we're going to take the first element. Why are we doing this? Because the IDs are, let's say, place.445 or region.321 or country.653. So there is some number after the dot and we don't want that, so we want to split it over the dot and take the first element. Then we're going to say address, which is our object here, and identifier, which is the element name, so either place or region or postcode or whatever, and we are saying the address identifier or the property in the address here is going to be set to the element.text. We are doing this way, so we are basically iterating through each property name and getting value for each of those instead of manually doing it. After that, once we've gone through each element, we're going to set address to the address, and we're going to set suggestions to an empty array, so our suggestions are basically gone. And now if we start typing here, let's say first street, we do get our autocomplete, but if we click on it, nothing happens right now. So the next stop is implementing the map over here. As we already established previously, map is going to get 3 props, longitude, latitude, and update coordinates function. We are also going to set up our prop types here. So longitude and latitude are numbers which are required, and update coordinates is a function which is also required, and we are importing prop types. We also need to import our pointer icon. I called it pointer icon. You can call it whatever you want. For the map to work and for the marker to work, we need to import React map.gl and marker from react-map-gl. And we are going to handle some useState, and we are going to have a useEffect. So we need to import useState and useEffect from React. And after that, we are also going to import our token for the map. So in order to use the React map.gl, you need to have your token, which is going to be passed into the component. So just set the token to a property here. As far as handling the state goes, we're going to have our viewport and set viewport, which use state, and the default value is going to be latitude and longitude, which we are getting as props. And we are going to have a zoom property here, which is specific to React map.gl. It's basically how far along is your map zoomed in. I played around with some numbers, got to a number of 16. You may want some other number. We are going to have another use state for our marker. So we're going to have marker and set marker, which use state, which is an object which has latitude and longitude. We are going to have a use effect here, which says when latitude or longitude changes, we want to set viewport to a new viewport, which basically accepts the old viewport, spreads it, and sets the new latitude and longitude properties. This is going to happen when we change the marker's position. We are going to change the latitude or longitude. We're going to update the state above. The new state is going to be passed into the map, and it's going to basically move the viewport to its new position. We are going to have another function here, which is going to be called handle marker drag, which accepts the event as a parameter. The event which happens in this case when we stop dragging the marker. Inside of the event which we get after the drag drag ends, there is a property called lnglat or lnglat, which has two properties inside, which are lat and lng, which are latitude and longitude. So latitude is going to be equal to event.lnglat.lat, and longitude is going to be equal to event.lnglat.lng. We're going to set marker to the new latitude and longitude, and we're going to say update coordinates, which, if you remember, is just a function which updates just the coordinates in our main address state in App.jsx. Inside of the div, instead of the map text, we are going to add our React map GL component, and we are going to start adding props to it. So first of all, this is mandatory. We need to pass in the default viewport that we are setting here. We need to pass it into the React map GL as a spread out object. Then we need to say MapBox access token equals to our token. After that, we need to say map style equals to, and this is a string which you don't necessarily need to set to this specific string, but this one will work. So if you want to use this one, feel free to use it. This is just a link to some default MapBox styles for the map. There are plenty of them. This is streets-v12. If you want to use a different one, feel free to go to documentation and dig out a different one, but this one is just a regular one that you can use. We are going to add an onMove event, which is just setting the viewport to the new value, which is the view state, which we get from the event. When we hold and drag the viewport, the event automatically has a property in there called view state, and we are just, panning it or dragging it to a new position. Inside of the React Map GL, we are going to add a component called marker, which we imported from React Map GL. And inside for the props, we're going to say latitude equals marker.latitude, longitude equals marker.longitude. So this is our state for the marker. Then we're going to say draggable equals to true, because marker needs to be draggable. And we're going to say on drag and equals handle marker drag, which we already implemented here. And in the end, inside of the marker, we are going to add an image with a class name of a marker and with source of our pointer icon. We don't want to show map always. We want to show it conditionally if there is something to show. So if there are coordinates, if there is longitude and latitude, then we want to show the map. So we're going to say curly braces address.longitude and address.latitude, and in regular brackets we're going to put the map. So this way the map is going to be rendered conditionally. Also, I forgot to add here, so we need to say class name equals map. And now when we refresh and let's say first street 20, it's going to open up a map, and there it is. So we can drag, we can zoom out, zoom in, and we can change the location. And now if we say confirm and open up the console, in the console we're going to have the selected address with the object, so it's in Australia, and we can confirm that our manual editing is working. Let's say Sydney, and let's say confirm. And then if we go back to console, we are going to have a new selected address, and the place is going to be changed to Sydney. And that is it for this project. As always, all of the code is going to be available on my GitHub account. In the next couple of days, I will also post a text version on my blog if you are more of a text person. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment down below. My name is Alex. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you in the next one.